Dear viewers, welcome to today's format visit, and yes, it's nice that you find time again for this show, and thank you for all the valuable letters. Today I would like to work on a letter from Tamara. Tamara lives in Upper Austria. Tamara is 37 years old and she writes to me, Tamara, that the situation that we have experienced here in 2 years has opened her eyes quite a bit, and there has been a great loss of trust for her, and she says her heart has opened up incredibly for a medicine that is natural medicine, and it is nice that you put it so clearly, because I have to tell you there is no alternative to it. You write that at the age of 18 you have already been diagnosed with a morbus Wilson, and you have, or she has, put her whole life on the line. Of course, you then went through a very classic internal diagnosis. This gene defect has then of course been proven. You were treated with medication, but this therapy did not follow in the whole concentration, more or less. You write sloppy intake, but you didn't notice that I had somehow worsened your physical condition. And today we are at the point where maybe everything is not so well diagnosed. It is not that easy for me to simply suggest a medication treatment, and the feeling tells me not to be so sick, but that maybe many things contributed to the development of these things, and they lead to the focus of a non-optimal diet. Of course, through this email I can't see any further things. Much more would be needed, but you ask for advice and ask, I would like to take you up on your offer and would like to expect a second opinion from you. And I would also like to do that very much. I can well imagine that there are also many people who say, what is this at all, a morbus Wilson? This is a disease that we often diagnose people who are only over 20 years old. And that actually means that there is a gene defect that no longer allows the body copper to be sufficiently dismantled and separated. And the clinical symptomatology is then such that people often have a large so-called ring around their eyes, and this special ring then very often points to such a copper separation or genetic effect. The other thing is that other organs in the case of a developing morbus Wilson, such as the heart, kidneys, and bones, can also be associated, also the central nervous system. But as always, in the end, we don't know anything else than that this genetic effect exists. And to what extent this can become a problem for you, Tamara, or not, of course, things that should be researched a little bit more in depth now. And of course it is also important that you take good care of it and first analyze which function copper actually has. Copper as an element for us in our body. And copper is important to us. We can only absorb 0.2 milligrams a day, and that has no side effects for our organism. In particular, the liver is an organ that not only stores iron as ferritin, But that copper is also always available for all metabolic processes. It is a real component of higher beings. And without copper, for example, thousands of enzymes and enzymes are active ingredients that only allow the reaction, the biochemical reaction, from A to B, are not possible. We take copper in the range of approximately 2 milligrams. Copper is mainly contained in the daily need for, let's say, chocolate, liver, grains, vegetables, nuts. These are all copper-containing foods that you should of course know so that you don't overdo your copper content. In your case, it is very important that you get a picture of how far your liver is or how much copper the liver has to store at all. It actually only does that if you want to keep certain reserves in the body and if you can keep the ball in good balance. Copper, excess copper, is then excreted through the gallbladder and the small and large intestine. And yes, these are things that, of course, in the context of a morbus Wilson, in the context of a deficiency in copper production or not excretion through the liver, then copper is given into the bloodstream and can then be distributed to the organs. That is the background. Incidentally, people with dementia very often have a copper deficiency. So you have to look at copper in this regard. And it is important that you first know what morbus Wilson really is. A lot of protein-bonded proteins are also bonded to copper. And you also speak a bit like with colloidal silver from a very antibiotic effect. So copper has an effect on bacteria, on viruses. That is why you often put a copper coin to fresh flowers. At least that's what they used to do. The flowers stay fresh longer there. You do that today with the sugar in the little bag. But it would be much better to change that or to give fresh water every second day. But in the past, this observation was made that copper also has an antibacterial effect at the moment. Toxic effects actually only occur when too many of these copper ions are bonded to the thiol groups of the proteins. And that then of course partly leads to an intracellular destruction. I don't want to expand on that. It's about finding a way to live with this fact for the time being. Or even a genetic determination alone is sometimes not the key to an illness. For my observations, it is the case that genes are switched on in the course of life, genes are switched off, and how far the whole thing comes to bear will depend on the overall situation of the organism. That is why it is important that we provide the body with an optimum amount of copper, but not for a massive, overflowing organism with copper. And of course there are innards that have a lot of copper, such as liver and kidneys. There is a lot of copper in beef. Green, dark leafy vegetables contain a lot of copper, but also legumes, chanterelles and champignons, haggis, parsley, dried fruits contain a lot of copper, walnuts, whole grain products, and also chocolate. That means, on the one hand, it is this supply, but please also not the oversupply of the organism with copper. Penicillin and the artamine 250 mg have received this drug in order to bind copper. It is actually an antitoxic substance that can also bind a lot of lead in the organism. Today we again and again see people with high levels of lead, and of course these things play a major role as binders and can be detoxified and then excreted via the kidneys. It is important when talking about copper that you should also know that copper itself, like magnesium, for example, has calcium as counterpart. So copper also has a lot of counterparts that are of course very valuable. If one falls, the other rises. So this is a dualism, and copper, for example, has the opponents sulphur, but also zinc. Manganese and iodine. Today we see very well that many people have iodine defects, and iodine, of course, is not only contained in iodine salt, that is not such a good source, but iodine also, of course, in fish is a good source, or the Luggold solution. Whether a iodine deficiency or non-iodine deficiency can also be experienced a bit by a so-called iodine test. To do this, you apply Luggold solution 2%, that is iodine and iodide, to the forearm, a small square of 6 by 6 centimeters, and observe to what extent this iodine stain is absorbed by the body very quickly, and according to an observation over 6, 8, 10, or 12 hours you can then indirectly measure whether the body needs iodine. Of course, also in adjusting the thyroid values, and if the TSH, for example, is above 2.5, the thyroid tends to be a bit in a lower supply or in a lower provision of thyroid hormones in the long term, and you always have to ask yourself whether the cofactors are given for the thyroid. But iodine also plays a central role in the framework of the copper metabolism, and that is why I would ask you to take a look at these things. The TDR also gives an indication of an indirect intrusive undersupply in the hormone metabolism, and that can be an iodine problem, and that is why it is very important. We see a lot of iodine deficiencies. People no longer have small lumps. As far as I can see, this can be a toxic problem. In the past, the thyroid responded with increased volume. Today, it also reacts with inflammation due to the high levels of Epstein-Barr. But you should really take a look at that too. This is iodine. Iodine is also responsible for nerve metabolism. Iodine is responsible for detoxification of bromine, of mercury, of toxic metals. Iodine is responsible for major disinfection. Iodine becomes antibacterial, antiviral, and you should know the iodine level, and you should also put a lot of emphasis on integrating this into the treatment so that the iodine level is also visible. The other thing is zinc. Zinc is a multi-cell, intracellular multi-talent of the cell. Zinc is always in the conversation, but zinc is also crucial for hundreds of enzymes. Without zinc, there is no intracellular immunity. Without zinc, there is no regeneration. The hair is also dependent on zinc, the mucous membrane health is dependent on zinc, the regeneration of our skin in general. Zinc is a multi-talent, and zinc is important. Zinc can be measured intracellularly. Zinc cannot be stored. That's why you have to substitute zinc continuously. You also do this by measuring zinc in full blood to know how this mirror is there and what you can do there. The other thing is manganese. Manganese is a very important trace element, and manganese, you always have to know, if you also want to know, is a copper metabolism, okay? Manganese is also a component of a lot of enzymes. Manganese is also responsible for the detoxification performance, for our energy performance, for our mitochondrial performance, and thus accelerates various processes in carbohydrates, in fat metabolism, but also in protein metabolism. And this allows important and valuable metabolism and metabolic processes to take place. Manganese is absorbed in the small intestine, in the human organism, and then reaches the liver, the bones, the kidneys, and the gastrointestinal tract. And as I mentioned, manganese is responsible for our energy and detoxification performance, and in this case, especially for the enzyme, the superoxide dismutase, which can still be clinically measured to see how healthy it is. Structure: cartilage, bones. We don't even talk about the regeneration of our bones. These are osteoblasts and osteoclasts, this buildup and demolition. Sometimes the buildup is still good, but the demolition is too fast. Is the demolition okay, but the buildup is too slow? These are all things that are also manganese dependent. Or arthrosis. Arthrosis, a manganese deficiency, leads to arthrosis. These are things that we really should know today, and we absorb manganese in, for example, green cabbage, oat flakes, but also rice, hazelnuts, lentils, soya beans. In such a program I just need to give a few information, and I think if you Google where manganese is contained, then you can already draw a bit of conclusions. Is that actually the focus of my life, or do I negate such things? When will I eat rice or all those things? That's important. The body is pretty merciless. Believe me, please, I have become very humble over the course of my life. And I practice a vegan diet. We practice fasting, we practice a vegetarian diet, but these are always offers for life cycles. Basically, life really has to be set up very, very broadly, because if I neglect the protein, then I will not be able to produce a sufficient reconvalescence. If I don't manage to understand that cofactors are necessary, that such processes happen, if I don't manage to provide the vitality and energy in this life every day again and again for the body, then there are deficits. We are a society that believes, or that has also been raised a bit, that we can cope with a mineral mixture or a trace element mixture and with the food supplements. We have everything now, and now it has to be good again. I tend to be more and more mindful, to be more humble, but to be more focused. In a few things, that's a big deal, and nothing, but nothing at all, is in relation to what I have on the plate. I have to make sure that life also conveys vitality to me, and the liver is so, liver in English is the life, shows us a lot of how grateful and powerful it regulates these processes for us, if we only supply it well. So counterplay from copper, zinc, manganese, and iodine. And I forgot sulphur. Sulphur is almost 40 times more in our organism than iron, and sulphur needs the human organism. Now I'm not talking about sulphur, which we now have out there as sulphur emissions, where if you say these are emissions in the air that are highly toxic, these are sulfites or sulfuric acids, as they are also used in the food industry. For example, with dried fruit. You can't keep dried fruit. That means this dried fruit is usually sulfured. That's a form of sulfur that I don't want to talk about. I would like to talk more about the methyl sulfonylmethane, namely MSM, and you all know that, and this sulfur is so responsible for the health of our hair, our nails. our bones, our tendons, our ligaments, because this form of sulfur is built into amino acids, methionine, cysteine, and these need this sulfur, otherwise they cannot provide the body with taurine for detoxification as part of these building processes. And it is a component of all enzymes. It is a component of all hormones and also of insulin, but the most important thing is actually the glutathione. And if the glutathione cannot be produced sufficiently as a high quality of the intracellular antioxidant, and many people give glutathione directly and liposomal glutathione, and we also work as part of our heavy metal excretion infusion with glutathione, but usually I don't give glutathione orally, because the body has to produce these processes itself, because it needs the sulfur on such a broad basal level. And if sulfur needs 40 times more than iron, and that is already a central atom, then we need it because otherwise we cannot know the metabolism of the body optimally, that it regulates it for us, for the intracellular energy gain, for our immunity and also, of course, for our complex detoxification system. And now we come back to copper. So copper is one thing, the accumulation, but the other thing is to make sure that all the regeneration, also through the liver and the excretion of copper, is of course forced and carried through detoxification. And so it is important to know that sulfur is in everything that smells so unpleasant. So, for example, onions, eating garlic, just have a garlic party at home or eat enough garlic on Fridays and Sundays in the evening. But sometimes you don't take so much consideration for the environment, the smoker sometimes doesn't either. And do it for yourself, because you need this food source in your diet and maybe a little less in your age on the weekend. More nuts, but also legumes, meat, cocoa and not cocoa, crabs, eggs, they all have sulfur. And here again the appeal, just read sulfur-containing food and it's all incredibly valuable. And that's how I would proceed. So I think that one, that doesn't even use the Damocles sword, to see and to find and to mean. You would now go into a drama, because you see the forecast tomorrow, what can happen to the Morbus Wilson. Now it means being a little careful. Now it means to look at things, to keep yourself in balance. Maybe every now and then, if possible, to think of inaspheresis, because here, too, these separation parameters are recognized by the filter extracorporally, one too much. And of course it stays there, not just copper and heavy metals, but of course also pesticides, herbicides. Lately, also through the filter, we can filter out nanoparticles and also microplastics. That's incredible. But that's why I say that I think the new generation, which is today confronted with a fact, is making its way. And I wish you wholeheartedly that you take this as an occasion to get more and more into the big, exciting area of natural medicine. And you will really see the jungle that I used to see in front of me and thought, wow, I'll never manage that. It all clears up so organically, so nicely with each other. And the more you get your hands on it and know that you can consciously control a process with consciousness. Consciousness, of course, makes a decision. You decide what you buy, what you don't buy. And all in all, you take it very boldly and actively into your hands. And I wish you a very good, stable, healthy life. And your thought was right to get on your way. And all the best for that. Finally, A little tip, another nutritional tip. We're talking about healthy nutrition. What is it anyway? And I just want to say to you very briefly at the end, eat sweet or sweeten your food and salt your food. But do it yourself, but don't let it do it. That means, of course, that you should deal with sugar with a conscious approach. Because the overconsumption of sugar, and everywhere where sugar is already in it, it becomes dangerous if I consume these things very frequently. This caramelizes the erythrocytes, the red blood cells. We'll call it that. But that's so important because we can measure a value in blood. That's HbA1c. And that means that the red blood cells, which are the most valuable oxygen carriers, can live for about 120 days. Of course, we can always look back at the last few months. Are they free? And if this HbA1 value is in a good optimum, then that's really, really good. Because then you are not in danger of getting diabetes in 10 years. But if a HbA1 value rises, then of course a process begins that brings the overconsumption of sugar for the body on the other side a lot of deglutition. And that starts with, of course, neuropathies, i.e. nerve problems. That starts with changes in the vessel situation. And I don't want to talk about diabetes at all, but these are all homemade things. That's why you put sugar in your food. And then, of course, you take isomaltulose or xylite or sometimes a little honey preferably. That metabolizes the substance very quickly. The dose makes the poison. In the past, the sugar was only in the sugar can and it was given for special reasons. So be very considerate and mindful of the use. We say today far more than 50 kilos per year per person, and no metabolism is adapted to that. And there is still constant insulin screaming. But on the other hand, you also make salt for food. Without salt it is not possible. The body also needs salt. But there is so much salt in the fast food industry and it is too much. That's why you don't salt potatoes, but you make it for the food. Then you take high-quality salt, a Himalayan or a sea salt. So basically only sweeten and salt, if then yourself, and just be careful with it. Maybe you can also do a show only about sugar, because that alone would open a lot of eyes, which is then so by the way our valuable health a bit boycotted and destabilized. In this sense, thank you very much for all this attention, and I am already looking forward to the next Visite show. For all your questions, if you need a medical advice from a holistic point of view, please send it to visite-at-QS24.tv. All the best for the next time and see you soon.